But first, we always begin the show with a short editorial. They say you can't please everyone, but I know from experience that you can certainly upset everyone. And I'm going to do that today by wrapping up, wait for it, the Nazis, Jesus Christ, the crucifixion, the federal election, and transgender activists all into one neat little Good Friday bundle. So I apologise in advance if my comments send you into a fit of apoplectic rage and running for the cover of the nearest Twitter page. But unfortunately, I don't pluck my editorial topics out of thin air, but rather they are determined by what is going on in the news on the day. So what in today's news could possibly remind me of the crucifixion? Well, for many secularists and agnostics, the stories in the Bible are not necessarily historically or literally true, although, of course, they may be, but rather they serve as parables, warning us of the dangers that can come from the less admirable traits of human behaviour and emotions. So, at its most basic, the crucifixion is the story of what happens when the mob gets deliberately fired up about an individual, and those in authority simply wash their hands of whatever comes next. It's also a story of betrayal and of forgiveness. Now, the term to be crucified has long been trivialised or softened to encompass all sorts of behaviour by the baying mobs. John Lennon famously sung, "Christ, the way things are going, they're going to crucify me." The British tabloids didn't literally nail John or Yoko to the cross, but they certainly attacked them with the lynch mob gusto. Careers and reputations are today frequently crucified. And the culprit is not only the media, but also social media. It's called cancel culture. If the point of the Bible is to offer up parables and warnings, you've got to hand it to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John for their visionary assessments, because it's hard to come up with a better analogy for Twitter, Facebook, and modern media and social media lynchings of one solitary individual than the story of the crucifixion. Now, I'm not saying the person I'm about to defend is some kind of Christ-like figure. That would be silly, and worse, would risk making me a candidate for hyperbole on outsiders. But if you want a tale about someone who's trying to do good in the world, being condemned by the mob, abandoned by the authorities, and falsely accused of doing bad in the world, then look no further than this morning's and yesterday's inflammatory headlines about the Liberal Party candidate for Warringah, Katherine Deves. Liberal candidate compared trans activist to Nazi resistance, screeched the Australian, clearly forgetting the debater's golden rule that if you mention the Nazis, you automatically lose the argument. The Guardian went even further. Liberal candidate likens trans activism to opposing the Holocaust. Wow. What a horrible person would be the instant response from most people to flipping over a headline like that. And sure enough, as quick as you can say knee-jerk reaction, a couple of representatives of leading Jewish organisations were tripping over themselves to condemn the remarks. Wrongly, in my opinion. Yes, trivialising the Holocaust is always reprehensible, and I'm one of those who is the first to condemn those who do so. But this is not what was happening in this instance, as I shall explain in a sec. Following the mob attack, Katherine Deves then did what was required by her political masters and apologised for her remarks. She shouldn't have, in my opinion. Et voila, she is forever guilty of the most heinous of crimes. Next, we learn that the Prime Minister has washed his hands, backflipped on his support for Senator Claire Chandler's crucial bill to limit transgender women, i.e. biological men, from participating in women's sports as a result of Katherine Deves' remarks. Someone go and fetch ScoMo a bag of nails. I'm being facetious, of course, but here we have the perfect execution of a left-wing lynch mob tearing down a well-meaning and admirable woman who, I have no doubt, history will show to have been on the right side of the argument. So let's get to the bottom line here. Who is Katherine Deves and what does she stand for? Apart from being the Liberal candidate for Warringah up against Zali Steggall, Katherine Deves is a co-founder of Save Women's Sports, a lobby group that wants to do exactly what it says on the pack and no more. Save women's sports. Save them from what, you may ask? Well, from this.
Swimmer Leah Thomas finishing in first place in the 500-yard freestyle, making her the first transgender athlete to win a national championship in the NCAA Division I. Thomas saying she had no expectations for this competition.
Leah, how did that performance measure up to your expectations coming into this meet tonight?
I didn't have a whole lot of expectations for this meet. I was just happy to be here trying to race and compete as best as I could.
Olympian silver medalist Emma Wyant placed second. She lost to Thomas by 1.75 seconds at her chance to take first place.
And from this, according to a teammate, Leah Thomas doesn't always cover her genitals in the locker room, meaning, of course, her penis. Or this, where in the UK, female riders threatened a boycott if trans cyclist Emily Bridges was permitted to compete. Or this.
I really just wanted to bring attention to what has been happening in Connecticut because I personally think it's really unfair to have biological males race against biological females because we just cannot keep up with the physical advantage of a male body. And so I decided to put out my own story out there so that people could understand what was happening and how unfair it was.
And to be clear, I'm guessing you are not anti-trans in any way.
No,
Just to
not at all.
put it out there. Okay.
Or this story where we learnt yesterday that 2 women inmates in a New Jersey women's-only prison have become pregnant after having sex with a trans woman prisoner. How is that possible, you may ask? Maybe our enlightened public health bureaucrats can tell us. Now, whether we like it or not, the question of whether trans women, in other words, biological men who now identify as women, should be allowed to compete in women's sports is a legitimate question, not only for sports bodies to decide, many have, and for now, they allow trans women to compete. But equally, it's a legitimate question for biological women to debate, and in the case of Katherine Deves and others, to lobby against. I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of the debate. Let's be honest, to any sane person, the answers are self-evident. But they basically boil down to the question of fairness and safety on the playing field, as well as the question of sexual safety off the playing field. It's a legitimate and important debate, but you cannot have the debate without, by definition, questioning very innate and very personal details surrounding the precise biological definition of what is a woman versus what is a trans woman. The militant trans lobby, however, refuses to even countenance any aspect of that debate, insisting that there is no difference whatsoever. They then accuse those who dare ask these questions of some great evil, which is preposterous. Yet that is where we are currently at. The point Katherine Deves was making that led to the idiotic Nazi and Holocaust headlines was that a woman has to be a very brave woman in today's censorious environment to speak up on the transgender issue, which is true. Just ask J.K. Rowling, Germaine Greer, Martina Navratilova, and other proud feminists and lesbians. Indeed, the pile on Katherine Deves proves that very point. Now, you can liken such bravery to members of the French resistance speaking up against the trains rolling past, or not, which is what Deves actually said. Not that you know it from the headlines. But that analogy is no more absurd, no more offensive, and certainly no more idiotic than, for example, the grotesque absurdity currently on display on an almost daily basis around the world, where officials and officialdom, even from our finest public health bureaucracies, dare not even tell you what a woman is.
Can someone please provide me with a definition of what a woman is? Department of Health. Definition of a man, definition of a woman. Anyone?
It's pretty basic.
Basic stuff. Professor Murphy.
Look, I think there are a variety of definitions, and I think
Just a simple one.
Perhaps to give a more fulsome answer, we should take that on notice.
You're going to take on notice the question of what a woman is.
No, well, there are a variety. It's a very contested space.
We pay for those clowns. And they've been telling us for the last 2 years exactly how to live our lives. They can't even define a woman. Whether they appreciate it or not, the voters of Warringah now have a unique opportunity to participate in and even pass judgment on this extraordinary worldwide debate. On the one hand, they can cast their vote for Zali Steggall, a woman whose campaign, as far as I can tell, revolves around terrorising little girls into believing the world is coming to an end, like this.
I just don't know if they're going to do anything. And I'm so concerned with the fact that if they're not going to change anything, then what's going to happen to humankind? What's going to happen to the whole world if no one does anything?
Nice work, Climate 200. Or the voters of Warringah can and should cast their vote for Katherine Deves, whose sole aim is to ensure that young girls of the age of that girl in tears, young girls can play sports in a way that is fair and physically fair and sexually safe. I know who I'd be voting.